Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and AP English, and we turn now in our study to Kafka's classic Metamorphosis. Now, this is an important little novella. We don't really call it a novel. You can call it a short story, but most people call it a novella, published in 1915. Without question, one of Kafka's best-known texts, without question, one of the most important titles of the 20th century, without question, influencing even into today, still in the 21st century, much of our thinking, okay? Some of the best word pictures about alienation that you're ever going to find written in a single text. And the text has this bizarre quality that it can be read both at the literalist level as well as at the fantasy level, okay? So many different interpretations of this text. The great writer and philosopher Nietzsche said that it's all about hermeneutics, interpretation. Certainly the case with everything that's driven by Kafka. So I'll just give you the first line of the story. It is a famous first line, and some of you will go, "Oh, dude, I've heard this first line of the story. I just didn't know that it came from this." It runs like this. One morning, when George Samsa woke from bad dreams, he discovered he was transformed into a horrible bug. Now, sometimes the word in German is translated not as bug, but beetle. This is going to be a story about a guy who wakes up in the morning in his bed, but he's not him anymore. He's a bug. No, I mean literally a bug. Like, he is an actual large beetle bug. And the rest of the story is about how he goes through the experience of being transformed. You can now understand the title, Metamorphosis, to transform, into a bug. Therefore, the story right away will deal with two elements. What happens to poor George when he wakes up and he's no longer human, but he's a bug? Ironically, his first thought is, I gotta get to work. I'm sorry, dude, you're a bug with little, antenna and little arms and little legs, and this kind of thing. No, I gotta get to work because I'm supposed to be at work and I'm actually late for work. I gotta get to work. So it's an individual text, but as well, he lives within a family, because we're going to find out that George supports his family with this job that he's got to get to. And so how's the family going to treat him once they realize George is no longer George, but now he's a beetle bug, right? Okay, and so we've got a very interesting sociological dynamic as well. Let's do some real quick brief biography on Kafka. Born the 3rd of July, 1883, and dies June 3rd, 1924. Very young, obviously. He brought together, many argue, realism and fantasy in ways that very, very few other writers have ever done it. He's, in many ways, responsible, or at least contributing to the development of what we call the literature of the absurd. I mean, obviously it's absurd to imagine that you wake up in the morning the form of a beetle, a bug or something like that, that you still have all your cognitive capacities just like normal. In other words, you think the same way, but you're somehow fundamentally a different kind of person. And yet, I suppose I could ask you, if you could go back in time, the morning you woke up for the very first day of kindergarten, right? So you woke up and you're like, I got to go to kindergarten today. We can't really reclaim that memory for most of us because it was just one more day in a bunch of days. Although I've had seniors that say, I do remember that day. I remember that day. I remember the day when I had to go to kindergarten for the very, very first time in my life. In some very interesting way, you were never the same you after that morning when you woke up. That is to say, you woke up transformed. Now, you can call it a beetle if you want it, but the bottom line is, when you showed up for your first day of kindergarten, they were asking you to do things you had never done before, in the ways that you were being asked to do them. And to that degree, you were trying to figure out this freaky new thing, you know what I'm saying? What's it like to go through transformations, both physiological as well as emotive? That's going to be a whole lot of this story. Interestingly, at 40, Kafka will die of tuberculosis. He lives a pretty wretched existence. He's always kind of on the borderline with poverty and some of those kinds of concerns. He doesn't have the best of relationships, especially with his father, and that will come out in a number of the Kafka stories. It'll even come out in this story as well. But as he's dying, he asks his pal, please burn all of my unpublished manuscripts. His pal, thankfully, did not listen to him, and we have then the gift of all of the other titles. Amazing, amazing stuff for Kafka. Maybe, you could argue, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. And Again, a lot of that debate will come down to, you and your own reading of it. I mean, like I've always said, don't just read this stuff because I tell you it's great stuff to read. Read it and then you decide if it works for you. There are some assumptions, let's remind you. Obviously, our learning theory is hypercritical in 303, that capacity to be able to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. So I'm always challenging you to think about doing that in your reading through our annotative process. Remember, we always ask 3 guiding questions. At level 1, what does the text say? I'll summarize it a bit for you. At level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages, as well as our big 5. That is to say, what does this text say about epistemology and what you can know? What does this text say about ontology and who you are? Well, you woke up as a bug, right? Okay. What does this text say about psychology and the individual mind? What does this text say about sociology and groups and the way groups kind of work together, especially families? Families are very interesting sociological studies, aren't they? The ways in which we find that we get along or we don't get along, right? And then finally the question in the big 5 is theodicy, the question of bad stuff. And why is it that bad stuff seems to happen in this world? And especially, why has it got to happen to me? I mean, can you imagine? You wake up in the morning and you're a beetle. You're lying there on your back. First thing you got to figure out is how to flip over because you're stuck. How are you going to open the door? Like how you can get up to the doorknob. And then you don't have hands the way you know. In other words, all the operations are now going to be for you painfully difficult, whereas before they were almost mindless. Why has this got to happen? The theodicy question. At 2A, we'll obviously ask as well about themes, messages. At 2B, that's the rhetoric side of things. Here we're going to ask not what Kafka says, but how he says it. More particularly, we'll focus on 2 things. Let's take a look at his symbolism. That's going to be a profound one. And the irony of the text. So for example, notice I've already mentioned it. He wakes up in the morning and he's a beetle. I mean, he recognizes he's a beetle. I'm a beetle. I'm not a human being anymore. Oh, dude, I got to get to work. Doesn't occur to him that on the bus ride to work, as a beetle, he'll probably get smashed on because that's what people do when they see bugs, is they kill them. We'll get to that, right? Okay. Finally, at level 3, we're going to ask, how can I relate to a text like this? At 3A, how can I relate this text to other titles that I know of, right? So for example, we're going to ask questions about all the great epics. Gee, how are great epics defined? Well, I don't know, somebody takes an amazing journey or a quest or a trek, right? Well, in the same way, I mean, think about this. In the same way that a young boy will pull the sword out of a stone, Excalibur, and it will immediately transform him into the King of England and all the other things that are ripple effects about that. In some ways, isn't that kind of like waking up in the morning and you're a beetle? I mean, it's not like you were expecting it, right? I mean, you're still the same you were before intellectually. You're just fundamentally different in every other way. That is to say, you're not the same you were before. See how that works? So we're going to ask at 3A the way that this text relates to other titles that we know, and then finally at 3B, and I can tell some of you already are starting to think, yeah, dude, what would that be like? I mean, how does it relate to you personally? What would that be like if all of a sudden you were not the same you were before? Gee, I wonder about maybe the Monday after the Sunday called graduation. Assuming you don't do too crazy graduation night. The next day is called Monday, which is no different from any other Monday that you've ever had, and yet it's totally different from any other Monday that you've ever experienced to that point. Why? I mean, you're still going to be the same you, aren't you? Well, yes and no. And I remember the senior who said, woke up on Monday morning, mom said it's time to go to work, and the student said, you don't get to tell me what to do anymore because I am now graduated. Yeah, the mom had a response to that. You can imagine what that was. Maybe the same response that poor Gregor's going to get a couple of times in this story, right? That is to say, let's now turn to the story. My assumption is you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. You've been reading all of the material. This text for us in AP comes at the very end of a 2-semester and even sometimes a 4-semester study. So there's a whole lot of stuff that comes before, and I'll make references to a lot of that stuff. And then finally, my hope is that you've read this on your own and you're coming to me to kind of help you know what it's about, all right? Let's go through it really quickly. Well, we already mentioned it. Gregor Samsa, he's a traveling salesman, and he wakes up in his bed to find that he's been turned into this large insect, a bug, a beetle, however you want to think of it. Again, the first thing he does, he looks around his room, and everything appears totally normal, just like it was before. And he decides, you know what, I'm just going to go back to sleep, and I'm going to forget about everything that's happened. In other words, imagine it like a dream, where you wake up, and you go, oh, I was having a bad dream, and you go back to sleep. Of course, he tries to roll over to go back to sleep, and then he discovers that he can't because of this new body of his, right? He's stuck. on the back, right? Convict's back, you know. So he tries to scratch an itch on his stomach, right? Like we do. And when he touches himself with one of his many legs, all of a sudden he's horrified, as you can imagine that you would be, right? So all of a sudden you look out, you see your hands, and your hands are not hands, but they're like little legs of a bug. Okay. And then immediately he starts thinking about, oh man, right? My life really stinks. I'm this traveling salesman, right? And how he wishes that he could quit his job if his parents and his sister didn't depend on him so much. That's huge. Write it down in your notes. Gregor is a man who has a lot of pressure on him. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. Some have read this story as, well, this kid's under serious post-traumatic stress, and that's why he's having this experience. You know what I mean? He wishes that he could quit his job, but he can't because the income is what helps the family. He turns then to the clock and immediately recognizes, oh, I got to get to work. He's overslept. He's missed his train. No, they're going to fire me. Note the irony of this already. Dude, you're a bug. And what are you worried about? You're worried about getting fired from your job because you're going to show up late? It's interesting, though, just to pause for a moment and think about the ways in which we do this all the time. Where something catastrophic happens, and we're like interested in you know, some kind of minutia type project, you know what I mean? And then somebody will say to you, dude, I don't think you need to worry about that. You probably need to worry about this other thing, because this other thing's a lot bigger. The human mind, the human psyche, and the way that we will sometimes try to divert the pain of our life by considering some kind of silly minutia or whatever, you know what I mean? And then we'll have the introduction of other characters. Let's start with Gregor's mom. She knocks on the door, right? When he answers her, he finds his voice has changed. He doesn't have the same voice, you know, because he has vocal cords, because now he's a bug, right? Of course, the family on the other side of the door immediately suspect, uh-oh, Gregor is sick. He's ill. He's not feeling well, right? His voice doesn't sound. They ask him to open the door. He always keeps the door locked. It's kind of out of habit. He tries to get out of bed. He can't maneuver his body, because obviously his body's transformed, right? He struggles to move. And then he hears his office manager coming into the family apartment to find out why Gregor is not shown up to work. So you kind of get this sense that he's this almost like indentured servant in his work, right? He's got this wretched life where he lives a single guy with his family, okay, his sister and his mom and dad. He works for them so that he can basically, you know, take care of them. And now all of a sudden, here it is, his boss is on the other side of the door going, where's Gregor and why isn't he at work? By the way, just put it in your notes, there's a profound Marxist reading of this text that says that so much of our life is defined by this silliness of having to get up every day and go do this silly job. And the job, of course, is required because in a capitalist society, you've got to make money. And yet somehow you're reduced to a bug. You can obviously see the symbolism at play. Okay. Well, obviously, he's got to find a way. So he rocks himself. It's almost comic. So he rocks himself. You know, he falls to the floor. He calls out that in a moment he'll open the door, right? And then, of course, the office manager's listening to all this, and he warns Gregor of the consequences of missing work. I mean, literally, I've had students that read this and they laugh out loud at this line. If you don't get to work, you're going to have some serious problems. And you can imagine that he's kind of looking at his arms going, oh, dude, I've got serious problems, but getting to work on time right now for me is probably not one of them because I'm about to get squished because I'm a bug. How is anybody going to actually know that it's me? That kind of thing, right? And there seems to be some suggestion as well that Gregor hasn't been doing a very good job as of late. If you know any text, now a 3A observation, if you know any text where the guy hates his job and wishes that he could get fired and is doing everything in his power to get fired, but they refuse to fire his can, and yet he still has to keep going into the job. If you know any of those kinds of texts at all, usually it's film for you guys, right? It draws back to this moment in time, literarily speaking, when Gregor's trying to figure out what's going on. Gregor will protest. He tells the office manager, don't worry, I'll be there in a bit, Right? Of course, the problem is not the office manager or the family can actually understand what Gregor is saying. They suspect something might seriously be wrong with Gregor, you think, right? So Gregor manages to unlock and open the door. And again, what's fascinating about this story is that the whole story, written in German, by the way, translated into English for most of you as readers of the story, unless you've studied German, What's fascinating is the beautiful language that describes the story as if it's in real time. That is to say, at no point does Kafka want to step in as the writer of the story and say, hey, symbolically we're all bugs living in this nasty little bug maze, or that kind of... None of that. That is to say, this is like we're supposed to take this as real. So he figures out how to unlock the door, opens the door with his mouth, because he has no hands, right? He begs the office manager's forgiveness for not showing up to work. And of course, the manager is horrified, right? There's this huge bug. And he bolts out, right? Something's wrong, this is a haunted apartment, whatever, and he leaves. Gregor immediately tries to catch up with the fleeing office manager. I mean, you can see this, a big cockroach, right? Running after the manager as he's running away, and he's screaming to get away. It's humorous, but it's dark and sardonic at the same time, right? His father, however, will drive him back into the bedroom with a cane and a rolled newspaper, which is what you do when you see a cockroach, right? That is to say, you're repelled, it's abhorrent, get back in the broom, that kind of thing. Obviously, you the reader, think Shakespeare here for a moment. You the reader are the only one that actually knows what's going on. Everybody else in the story just sees Gregor as now a bug and doesn't recognize that it's Gregor. How gross is that? All right. In the process, the first injury arrives. Now this is going to be important for your notes. Gregor keeps getting hurt. He's injured. He injures actually himself. He's squeezing back through the doorway and his father slams the door shut. You have this interesting kind of reading of this story about father and son. For any of you that ever grew up as sons, and the father would look at the report card and give you one of those, I am so disgusted with you right now looks. I mean, it doesn't have to happen to sons, by the way, right? But where the father, for example, is going to be this strong kind of dominant figure or whatever in the family, and you're kind of like, I'm never going to measure up and I'm so worthless, and all of those kinds of feelings, certainly those are feelings here. By the way, that we know that is the feeling that often Kafka himself had about his own father, who was a fairly strong, kind of virile man and all of that. Gregor is tired, he's exhausted. I mean, he's had quite a morning, so he falls asleep. He wakes up, and he sees that somebody has put milk and bread in his room, okay? And he gets really excited, and he goes over to try and eat, because he's hungry. But then right away, I mean, if you think about it, he's a bug, right? So all of a sudden, milk no longer tastes good to him. The thing that he used to love as a human, you know what I'm saying? The tastes are all like screwed up. So now, doesn't like it. So he goes, and he's got to find a new place to live. Where's he going to go? Under the couch. That's where bugs go, right? Into the darkness, under the couch. And then he starts to listen. And he listens to the apartment. It's quiet. And now we have the next morning. And we're going to meet Greta, his sister, right? So she comes in. She sees he hasn't touched the milk. And somehow Greta understands intuitively the relationship between sister and brother, right? That this is maybe Gregor. And I gotta help out Gregor. And if it's not Gregor, it's certainly a bug that needs help, right? So she starts thinking about it. She replaces the milk with this disgusting rotting food from the trash can, right? Food scraps, which Gregor, of course, loves because he's a bug. That's what cockroaches eat, right? And that's what cockroaches eat. And so now all of a sudden he's munching away on this rotting food. And all of this is like comic but sad at the same time. It's hard. We even have an adjective, by the way. If something is Kafkaesque, it means that you are in a world where strange things are happening. Some of you will smile and say 303. Where strange things are happening and you're never totally sure exactly what's going on, but you somehow feel that it's somehow changing you in bizarre and, dare we say, demonic ways, okay? So we have a routine that's created, okay? The sister feeds him, cleans up while he hides under the couch. Obviously, he doesn't want to frighten her because of his appearance. Gregor then will begin to spend time listening through the wall to his family members, and their talking and their exchanges. This is a fascinating moment. He begins to realize how he lives with these people, but he has no sense of who they are at all. They've talked all the time, but he's never actually listened to them. I had a senior once who read this story that said, dude, I guess I never really thought about it, but most of my high school career was getting up in the morning, leaving as fast as I could, going out and doing whatever I had to do, coming back through the door, saying something perfunctory to the people who raised me, and then going to my room and living behind my door in my room, but never actually recognizing I was living with these people called my family. How bizarre is that? Never listened to them, the way they talk, the way they exchange. Now all of a sudden as a bug, he's paying attention to this kind of thing, right? and what it is they talk about. And what they talk about is serious financial problems, right? They're obviously in financial problems now because guess what? Gregor is no longer, what it is they assume? What do they assume? Well, they assume obviously that Gregor ran away because he didn't want to work anymore, and he's not living with them anymore, and he must have run away, and now we don't have Gregor working. And they begin to kind of vacillate between, is that what's going on? Or is this large bug actually Gregor? And which is worse? That he ran away and he left us high and dry, or that our son is now this bug that lives under the couch in his bedroom? Right? Gregor will also learn that his mother wants to visit him, but that his sister and father say no. And so all of a sudden, think Hamlet here, you got this really interesting dynamic between mother and son. And you'll remember how in Hamlet, mother was this overprotective mother that was always trying to keep Hamlet from having something bad happen to him. We'll have the same kind of game going on here. Meanwhile, and this is the bizarre part of our story, Gregor himself starts to grow comfortable with being a bug. In other words, think of it this way. In any new experience that humans find themselves in, it is amazing how quickly we adapt. Darwin had a lot to say about this in Origin of Species, didn't he? That species will have this amazing capacity to just adapt to the new thing. Whatever that new thing is. Dude, I'm a bug. I guess I got to get used to being a bug, right? He begins, for example, he loves to start climbing. I mean, you know, you can climb now. So, for example, you can climb up the walls. You can get on the ceiling. You can, like, hang on the ceiling. Dude, this is kind of interesting. The perspective all of a sudden starts to change for Gregor as he begins to realize, okay, I guess this is the new norm. Whatever the old was, it's gone away. Now it's the new norm for me. Well, Greta obviously sees him climbing on the walls and that kind of thing, and she decides, okay, well, let's make it easier for him, and she starts to get some of the furniture and try and get it out of the room, right, to give Gregor more space so that he can obviously crawl around in the light. And she and her mom begin to take furniture away. But this kind of upsets Gregor. He finds it a bit distressing. He tries, for example, to save a picture on the wall of a woman. She's wearing